So we are really looking forward to an exciting evening with Dr. Hargreaves, and I thought I'd take a little time to look at his bio with you. And what jumped out at us was the fellowship and the sponsorship of his position at Boston College, which is around promoting social justice. So he is really very congruent, his work is very congruent with the work at SEL. Many of you, how many of you have read Sustainable Leadership? Great, excellent. We have used that book as a text in our school leadership programs. I think principals especially and system leaders find it really applicable to their work, and I know he's going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I decided that I'd take a quote from that book because I thought it was a good way for us to start this year. Leadership isn't and shouldn't be easy. The sooner we all have a chance to practice it, the better. It is hard to be a successful leader. It's still harder to be a sustainable one. Sustainable educational leaders promote and practice sustaining learning. Sustainable leaders sustain each other as they pursue this cause together. They sustain themselves, attending their own renewal and not sacrificing themselves as they serve their community. Sustainable leaders stay the course, stay together, stay around, and stay alive. We cannot afford to waste the time and energy of our teachers and our leaders any longer. But most of all, we can tolerate no more wasted lives among our children. These two things are connected. We have the opportunity to leave behind the overconfident, mechanical age of endless waste and enter a more sustainable era of hopeful renewal. It is an opportunity that must be seized. The lives of our children and the legacy we leave them depend on it. May I present Andy Hargreaves.
Did I write that? Yeah, wow. What was I on at the time? So, we have a little time together, and it's raining outside, but it'll be more than raining in our hearts inside, I think. One very good friend of mine, probably a good friend of many of yours, is Anne Lieberman, who used to be head of the Puget Sound Consortium. Yeah, any of you know Anne? She's written a lot on teacher leadership and so on, lives in California now. Her husband is Ernie Lieberman, and Ernie mainly follows Anne around the world these days because he's made a spectacular fortune as a songwriter from the 1970s onwards. And one of his songs was, a few years ago, voted on Seattle Public Radio as being the best song ever written about Seattle. And it is called It's Raining in Seattle. So I'm glad you've made me feel completely at home by giving me the feel of the song by the weather that's arranged outside. This evening, we really have an opportunity to look at what lies beyond standardization. And I'm going to give you a little intro to that, and then a sense of about 3 segments we'll dip into as we go through the evening. The intro is that we are moving from an age of what I would call old-style public management to new-style public management. If any of you people do courses in public administration, masters in public administration, even MBAs, they will get hold of this. What does old-style public management look like? 2 things: pressure, lots of it, and support, usually not enough. Old-style public management, which has seized most Anglo-Saxon countries in the last 15 years and still survives and persists here, is largely pressure from the top, where government or the state sets the goals for other people and operationalizes them as performance targets that other people then must meet in regularly tested ways through indicators, test results, and so on. This applies to all sectors, not just education. And then applies various very detailed line management techniques, performance reviews, the equivalence of adequate yearly progress, and all kinds of punitive intervention that also includes competition between providers in order to deliver these results. And underneath from the bottom, you get some support. For instance, the big wads of money that follow No Child Left Behind that you have to spend in about 3 weeks in order to deliver the results. So old-style public management is lots of top-down pressure related to goals, performance targets, operationalizing of them, with support, usually not enough. And in the past, my colleague and friend Michael Fullan has talked about pressure and support, but the question has always been how much pressure and how much support. Does this sound vaguely familiar to you? All the other English-speaking countries, every single one of them, have now left this behind. Every single one. And are now embracing instead something that is called new public management. Why they're doing this is that they've discovered that simply by operating the fear factor with top-down pressure, eventually you destroy motivation and capacity. So that if you can no longer get able and talented people to move into the public sector, it destroys the public sector. If you cannot attract teachers, and even worse, cannot keep your teachers once you've attracted them, because the job is seen as too punitive, too demoralizing, too unprofessional, too prescribed, you have nobody to run your system. If the principal gets as far, if new leaders get as far as the deputy principal's office, and then look at the principal's job, which is overloaded by performance requirements, test results, paperwork, bureaucracy, and transparent accountability in all this, and they look at it and say, you must be crazy to want me to take this job. You have a huge deficit of motivation and legitimacy. Every other English-speaking country, every single one, Australia, the United Kingdom, Ireland, New Zealand, Canada, every single one has come to grasp this problem. There's one that hasn't yet, but soon will, and that's the United States of America. What does new public management involve? Still, it involves at the top clear goals, set by, it's the government's responsibility to, in consultation with partners, to set a broad direction. Still targets, but often not quite so many of them. Still ways of operationalizing them and having indicators of them. But underneath, there's more support, more resources, more materials, more training, all the kinds of things that Dick Elmore will talk about when he comes with you, that Michael Fullan's talked about when he's been with you before. But more important even than these two are two things coming in at the side. On the left-hand side is public engagement, and involving at every level, at the state level, the district level, the school level, much more public involvement and consultation about the direction and the change strategies that we are using to narrow the achievement gap and improve public education. So much more public engagement over here. And over here, much more development of lateral capacity within the profession, of bringing about improvement and change by professionals working with professionals, teachers learning from teachers, schools helping schools, replacing what I call the fear factor with the peer factor, which is positive support and pressure from the peers around you in transparent systems of urgent improvement together. So the new public management then has still your goals and even some targets, though Michael Fullan and I debate what those should look like and who sets them and whether the answer should always be literacy and math. And we've just had a big debate in Australia, by the way, 2 days ago. So on Sunday I was in Australia and on Sunday I was in America. And as someone said before we started, perhaps for the first time in your life, you can give the same speech with the same title at the same time on the same day in 2 different continents. This is deja vu all over again. So, but the debate we had was about, should you, if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Canada, which are clumped in a group of countries that are the second highest performers in the world in literacy, should your emphasis really be literacy? Or should it be something else? Should you have problems sorting out solutions, or are you taking solutions that politicians like in search of problems? Which one is, are you with me? Here, literacy may be more of a reasonable focus, although I know you think you've fixed literacy now, so it's on to maths. So we debate what those targets and goals should be and who should set them, but we're absolutely agreed on the 3 other areas. Public engagement, stronger support, increased lateral capacity, and I'll unpack a lot of that as we move through the afternoon today. So I don't have a slide for this yet because this is so new. It's like the restaurant I went to in New Zealand. It's a fish restaurant, and I ordered the salmon, and they said, "Oh, sorry, sir, the salmon's not in yet." And I said, "I'd like to have the crab." "Oh, we've sold out of the crab completely. It's very popular. Everybody's had it." "Well, what about the grouper?" "Grouper's not very good, sir." I said, "This is a fish restaurant, isn't it?" And he said, "Yes, sir, it is a fish." And I said, "It is fresh fish, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "It's so fresh, we haven't caught it yet." So this is a bit what like my models of new public management are like. It's not my model, it's a recognized government model, but I don't have the slides for it. So this is really the agenda beyond the age of standardization in which we find ourselves now. And you need to get ready and you need to be prepared, because you'll probably find within about a year or so, this will be the increasing direction in which you are moving. And I'll try and unpack that in 3 ways. I'll talk first about, for those of you who've not read it, about sustainable leadership. And I'll draw on a book that Dean Fink and I wrote together called Sustainable Leadership, which is based on a study of 8 schools, 4 traditional, 4 innovative, in the United States and in Canada, and their experiences of educational change over 30 years. So that instead of tracking what happens to a change, we track the schools and see how they deal with multiple changes. And we find that most change disappears, but the innovative schools are more likely to maintain their change over time rather than the traditional ones. And we'll unpack a little bit about why that's the case, because one way we learn how to improve is by looking for outliers in our system of what the literature calls positive deviance. So although the system may generally not be working well, in your district, do you have one school that's working particularly well? Or in your state, a couple of districts that appear to be performing above the expectations? And then the challenge is not to clone those schools and to develop a system-wide strategy to implement it and scale it up, but rather through networks and communication to get these schools in contact with the other schools around them. Positive deviance, there's a literature on this. One of the classic cases is female circumcision in Ethiopia. And they tried everything to put an end to female circumcision. And in the end, the most successful strategies was, let's find out some families that don't practice female circumcision. Very small number owned up to it. Let's talk to them and find out some of the reasons. And it was to do with their feelings about their daughters, the future of their daughters, their love for their daughters, and so on. Now let's use these families to smoke out some other families who also don't practice it, but are not yet courageous enough to talk about it, to build a larger critical mass. And then let's put these families in communication and contact increasingly with other families, so you create change through a kind of process of infection of ideas, the spread of positive infection around the community. So when you see a positive outlier, the danger is to clone it system-wide. But the better strategy is to spread it through infection to the others around you. So this is the first thing that I will draw on. The second thing that I will draw on is I've just been, in January, you read a little bit about it in your paper, to Finland for OECD. Do you know who OECD are? You should. They are the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This is like the G7, the G8 of social policy for the world, for the world's developed countries. They really broadly set the strategies and directions that developed countries take in economic and social policy strategy. The OECD develops the PISA tests. You know what the PISA tests are? For performance and assessment in high-level skills in literacy, maths and science, where the US scores quite a ways down. But the top performing country in the world on PISA at age 15 is Finland. And OECD has just inaugurated a study of the relationship between leadership and improvement, system leadership and improvement across several countries. And they asked me if I would lead a team to Finland in January, which I did, along with somebody from the OECD staff and the former Deputy Minister for Hungary, because the nearest language to Finnish is Hungarian, which is probably something that not many of you actually know. It's a strange affinity between the two. So we went to Finland to look at what is the relationship between leadership, school improvement, outstanding results, and the smallest achievement gaps in the world in this highest performing country. And I'll talk second a bit about what we learned from Finland, including and especially about system leadership, which is how all the elements of leadership hang together. And then third and last, I will talk with you about the long and short of educational change. This work we've done evaluating a network of 300 underperforming schools in the UK, focusing on long-term, medium-term, short-term strategies of change through networked learning, schools helping schools, the strong helping the weak, the peer factor instead of the fear factor, where 2/3 of the schools improve at double the rate of the national average within 2 years, with very little extra funding behind them. So, are you okay? These are the three elements. But to get us started, I thought you might like a little bit of fun. Well, it's not really fun, it's more like pain, actually. And I'm going to show you this. It's actually at the back of your package, if you want to see the numbers more easily. I'm going to describe to you what this is, and then I'm going to ask you to work out what it means. Have you all found it? In January this year, the United Nations, through UNESCO, published a report on child well-being across the world's developed countries, for which it had existing data. And then, having got all this information on child well-being, it arranged it into this chart here. And I'll take you through what each of the columns means, and then I'm going to test your visual learning, your visual spatial learning, your mathematical learning, and because mathematics is such a priority now, so this will be a good test for you as to how to read the stats. But I'll explain what the columns mean. On the left-hand side are the ranking of countries. The countries are in rank order in terms of their overall average performance in child well-being compared to each other. The second column gives you the average number for the countries. So in the first column, the gaps between the countries are even. In the second column, you get a sense that the gaps between some countries are bigger than between others. Are you with me? So you see some big leaps in average scores in the second column compared to the first column where they're just in rank order. Then you get the 6 dimensions that make up child well-being. All these are from existing data taken from 15-year-olds. First is material well-being. These are measures of poverty or absence of poverty, of economic well-being, basically. This is column number 1. Column number 2 is health and safety. This is medical care, rates of child mortality, early medical care options for hearing, for eyesight, safety, accidents. This is column number 2. Column number 3 is educational well-being as measured by achievement tests. So this is, if you're thinking of achievement gaps, this is an achievement test measure of well-being. Fourth is family and peer relationships. How much do you feel part of your family? How much time do you have with your family? How accepted by your peers and part of your peer group do you feel? That's number 4. Number 5 is behaviors and risks. This is, for instance, premarital sex, early pregnancies, excessive use of drugs or alcohol, addiction. All these fall in number 4. Number 5, sorry. Number 6 is subjective well-being, for which there are no measures for the United States, but there are for all other countries. This is really measures of self-esteem, self-perceived well-being. So that's column number 6. At the bottom are the countries for which there was insufficient data, because it draws on existing data, not new data. What I would like you to do is look at this, turn in a moment to your partners, and determine 2 things. What patterns do you see there that are of interest and importance, number 1? And number 2, do you have any questions to ask or critical comments to make about the data that you see there? So, what do you see, and do you have any questions or critical comments? I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Turn to your partner to talk about what you see. Away you go. Okay, can I draw you back together, please? We've had our 5 minutes. Tell me some of the things you see first that are of interest and importance. What are some of the things you see that catch your eye?
Scandinavia is a place to be.
In terms of child well-being, mainly Scandinavia is the place to be, it looks like. Yes, so Scandinavian countries rank pretty high. Anything else?
There's some ex-Iron Curtain countries that tend to be towards the bottom.
But bear in mind that the data here are from 15-year-olds, and they're up to 5 years old. And some of what you see reflects what was going on with these kids when they were 7 or 8. So in some ways it reflects older patterns rather than newer patterns because of the legacy. But you're right, Eastern European countries especially on some of the economic indicators are much lower down. Other observations? Yeah.
This is probably overgeneralized, but that whatever the achievement tests are testing doesn't seem to have a strong correlation with actual health and safety of students.
Yeah. Much of the educational well-being as measured by achievement tests seems to be operating as an independent variable to child well-being. That this does not mean that children getting more literacy doesn't improve their opportunities elsewhere. It would be wrong to say so. But it means that more literacy and math does not by itself take care of increased and improved well-being. that you have to pay simultaneous attention to both of these. So, for example, if you increase attention to literacy and math by cutting the arts, by cutting social studies, by cutting physical education, to create a culture that is uncultured, uncouth, and unfit, then the price of your overemphasis on literacy and math may be too high because you're losing your kids in other areas. So they're both, it's not either or. In balance, you have to consider both of them. Anything else? Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that under health and safety, the top four are also, I mean, it's 2, 1, 4, 3
Yeah.
match up with the top four as well. So health and safety are.
Health and safety are very, that, you know, David Berliner shows this in America, that one of the greatest predictors of later underachievement is just the availability of early medical intervention, but for simple things like hearing, eyesight, and so on from a very early age. And if you've seen Sicko, you'll know how important that issue is within the United States. One of the things we learn from this table and that we'll see from Finland is schools are responsible for improving children's opportunities and narrowing the achievement gap, but they can't and shouldn't be expected to do everything by themselves. That investment in the other social sectors, health, social services, community development, is as important, parallel to what educators are doing and integrated with what educators are doing. So you're important, but you can't and shouldn't be expected to carry the whole burden and expectation by yourselves. And the strongest countries invest in all these areas, not just one as the place that's expected to solve the problem. Any other comments or observations? What about Canada, your closest country? What do you see going on there? Any observations on... I thought you'd be very interested in Canada. It's just over the border. I mean, you're practically Canadian already by being so close.
Pretty self-focused here in America.
Yes, I know. Geography has nothing to do with it. But what do you see in Canada? Look at the numbers. Sorry? It's all across Canada, yeah. What do you see?
Does it imply that they're wealthier than we are? Material better off?
Yeah, this is a paranoid schizophrenic country, basically. Well, it's not paranoid, but it is schizophrenic. In that it performs very high on achievement tests and very high on material well-being. So material well-being is pretty good in Canada. Rates of poverty are quite low. But in the other areas perform really quite badly. Healthcare kind of in the middle, but the other areas really quite badly, which means affluence does not guarantee well-being. In fact, because I know some of you are from suburban school districts, sometimes the relationship is inverse. In Canada, as in some of your districts, the lights are on, but nobody's home. And parents are so busy producing and consuming and looking for their third garage or their fourth vehicle or their second job or their fourth holiday that they've no time to spend with their kids sitting down and listening to them read, for example. One of the reasons we'll see Finland is such a high performer is it's an indicator of the society as well as the country, as well as the education system. Parents spend a lot of time with their children in conversation and play when those children are young. They're not out ravenously producing and consuming all the time. There's a better sense of balance. So affluence does not guarantee well-being. Remember, just so it's achievement, well-being, It's material well-being, other aspects of well-being. They need to be a simultaneous focus. Do you find this interesting or helpful?
Well,
Any
Finland
critical
has-
questions?
Finland has is rated 17, Canada 18.
Finland is what, sorry?
17 in family and peer relationships.
Yeah, the one deviant figure for Finland, Finland also has the highest rates of alcoholism in the world. Because their repressed Lutheran mentality, and the nights are long and hard in the winters. And there's not a lot, there are only two things to do, learn and drink. Those are basically the main options that you have. Any other critical comments about the figures here?
I think it's interesting that of the top 5 in column 6, subject well-being,
Yeah.
their educational well-being, 3 of those 5 are pretty sad in terms of number 2's subjective well-being. They're looking at it would be Spain is getting a 15 in the ed well-being.
Yeah.
3 is Greece is getting a 16.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, these are things going on in some ways in the Mediterranean countries. There are things going on within the families, but not so much or as well within the schools. So there are different ways of explaining these depending on what the fit between the culture and the system within education. Well, I hope you found this an interesting way to start what I've been trying to get across through this, yeah?
I have a question about homogeneity and how that interplays with your data.
Yeah. Well, you're going to give me that question about homogeneity, I hope, when we come to Finland later on. But the reason I showed you this first on well-being is that the Netherlands is a highly populated country, the most dense population in Europe, and also one of the most ethnoculturally diverse. Because the Netherlands is a former imperial country with a lot of colonies, all of whom have now come back home, well, not come back home, but come back to live and earn prosperity. So you see great cultural diversity within the Netherlands, and it's number 1. And I was cheekily putting that first, because I know you'll slay me later on for when I go on about Finland, which is highly homogeneous and at the top of the performance tables. But the Netherlands is very, very diverse, but a quite different culture compared to here, I think, in the way that it operates. So I wanted you to get a sense of the relationship between achievement, prosperity, and well-being. That it's quite complex, that narrowing the achievement gap means focusing on literacy, numeracy, and instruction, but it also means focusing on these other conditions around literacy and numeracy and instruction outside the school as well as in it, about the fit between your system and your society, between the culture of your school and the culture of your district and your locality over time. And that should now enable us to really go into these next 3 areas. As if you remember at the beginning, that there are a number of places from which we can learn how to improve. One is outliers within our system through that positive deviance process. 2 is who are the highest performers around us and what can we learn from them, which is why I'll be introducing you to Finland. 3 are what are some countries that are doing some very leading edge developments that look really promising, which is why I'll talk about this network of underperforming schools. And 4th, which I'll not talk about today, is the project that I've just started. It's almost a $500,000 project to look at performing beyond expectations in 4 sectors: education, health, business, and sport. Because I want to get some public engagement around what is sustainable beyond expectations in business, sport, and health, so that the public can more easily transfer that to what might be sustainable within public education. So that's the mission of the 4th project, but we've only just started it, so I'll not talk about it today, but perhaps next time I come, I might have some stuff on that to be able to share with you. So let's first go to the outliers and look at sustainability. And for those of you who've read the book, I hope this doesn't feel too repetitious in relation to what you've looked at. In sustainable leadership, Dean Fink and I, after looking at all of our data in and out, basically eventually came up with a definition of sustainability that was based on the Brundtland definition of the World Commission on the Environment and Development in 1987. Really one of the first places to operationalize the use of the term sustainable development that I'm sure in Washington State you use over and over again in about every context you can think of. And drawing on the Brundtland definitions report, we basically articulated that sustainability means more than maintainability, means more than keeping things going over long periods of time. Instead, sustainability is really, or sustainable development, is really about how, and think of this as a system leader, how do I protect, promote, and preserve things of value within my system, without doing harm or prejudicing promoting those things in the future, and without doing harm to others around me within the present. So how do we preserve and promote things of value without prejudicing our capacity to do it in the future, or undermining the ability of people around us to do it now? So that makes you think about, for instance, there's no use really pushing improvement now if it burns everybody out and they can't keep it up in the future. There's no use investing in a miracle leader now who can't, and then you can't get a successor to perpetuate it in the future. There's no use your wealthy suburban district growing and prospering at the expense of the poor district next door to you, because then it's like logging the trees without thought for the native peoples who make their living from the river that are affected by the logging of the trees. So here we have a much more sophisticated definition of sustainable development, of sustainable leadership, which is not just about time, but it's also about justice, responsibility, and the effect of others around you, and the integration of all of those together. Michael Fullan puts it in a compatible way when he says in his little book, Leadership and Sustainability, and you'll see lots of overlap between our two books, but you'll also see some differences. And my advice is always read both of the books and make up your own mind and do it together, because it's good that everybody doesn't agree on everything. Because if you have two people and they agree on everything, one of them's irrelevant. Shall I say that again? If you have two people and they agree on everything, one of them's irrelevant. So disagreement's actually quite productive in some areas if you see it as an opportunity for learning. He argues that sustainability is about understanding that systems are complex, everything relates to everything else, what you do over here affects what you're doing over here, and it's about taking responsibility for those interrelationships. In other words, what you do in one school affects what's going on in the other schools. What you do in one district has implications for the districts around you. And to the extent that they're related, you are responsible for the connections between those things over time. As we worked through this definition of sustainability, looked at our data, we came to 7 principles. And I'll just go through these fairly briefly now, so that those of you who've seen them before can sing them again. And for the others, it'll give you a quick introduction into the areas that these address. If I sometimes lose my words, please understand it is currently that I was presenting this morning in Vancouver, Washington State, to your Principals Association at what was then 1:30 in the morning Australian time, through till about 5:30 in the morning Australian time, and I've had about half an hour's nap in the interim. So should my words desert me from time to time, just once. Forgive me and bear with me if they don't come. I can sometimes see them out there, but the buggers just won't come, basically. But they're out there, I can see them. That's what jet lag actually feels like. So, here we go. 7 principles of sustainable leadership. And then I'm going to ask you to go up to a table which represents one of these principles and look at the implications for you. So you have to think about, as I go through these, which of these is the most compelling for you that you'd like to discuss with your colleagues right now, today. Okay? All right. Number 1, depth. At the center of sustainable improvement and sustainable leadership is your core moral purpose. When we go on to Finland, you'll see that one of the reasons that Finland performs so well is that it can attract very high quality teachers into the profession. All teachers in Finland have master's degrees, every single one, which they get, by the way, through free public higher education for all who meet the criteria. So there's no indebtedness amongst the Finns. If you want to go into teaching, your chances of getting in are about 1 in 10. Because when high school graduates are surveyed about their most preferred profession, teaching ranks higher than medicine, dentistry, law, or business. People want to teach in Finland more than they want to do anything else. The question is, why? It's not the pay. You are paid not extravagantly in Finland, but you're paid well enough. And in teaching, the only issue about pay is not that it should be really good, but that it should be not bad. Then beyond that, there's something else that brings people into teaching. And what it is in Finland, you'll see the detail of it later, is Finland has, as a society and as an economy, a compelling social mission, which everybody can articulate, from a child to the deputy minister, in almost exactly the same way, about where the country's been, where it's going, and what the teacher's job is in creating the generations of the future for Finland. There is a compelling social mission. People know where Finland is going. People know what Finland is for, not what it's against, not what it's afraid of, but what it is for passionately as a country. And teachers are seen as absolutely central to that. In your district, in your state, what are you for as a state? What are you for as a district? What will it be that makes people want to teach and be part of the renewal of your state, your country, over time? What will draw them into that? How do you articulate it? If I talk to a child in your district and to the state commissioner, will they broadly give me the same answers about where your district or where your state is going? And is that compelling enough to bring teachers into it and give teaching the high status among the public that it has in Finland? So 1 is your purpose. And the crucial one that we saw in our data, and that you've been seeing in your work here, and that Richard Elmore will articulate much more, is that learning comes first. Learning is the key priority that is the basis of your work as educators. Not achievement, not instruction, but learning is what comes first. And in fact, if you look at it this way, what we see in our data compellingly is this. We have 2 schools in our data. Have any of you heard me talk about sustainable leadership before? Because these are two very powerful examples. They're both actually in Canada, in Ontario, which had introduced a 10th grade literacy test linked to graduation. You couldn't graduate unless you passed the literacy test. By the way, one of the consequences, which is repeated in Massachusetts and many other places, is you link the testing to graduation and your dropout rates soar immediately. Because your scores go up at the price of the kids who were lost out of the system. I'm sure Gary Orfield went through some of these kinds of data with you in relation, yes, in relation to dropout. A little bit, okay. So, you have a literacy test. We had 2 schools responding to the same test. One school adopted what I call the Enron strategy of educational change. It focused on the short term. It said, how do we get the results up quickly? I know, we'll pre-test all the kids and we'll focus on a 20th percentile just below the passing mark, and then we'll prep the kids for the test so that they'll get through and the scores will look better. We have districts near us who employ people specifically to go round schools, identifying the percentiles just below the passing mark and giving them extra coaching and test prep, even in elementary schools where an extra 5% makes no difference to the child at all, only to the school's numbers for accountability. And all the effort goes into them and the other kids get cast by the wayside because all the effort's gone into them. And what were the results? In the first year, the scores went up. So it really does work in the short term. And in the second year, the scores went up again. And in the third year, they hit a plateau. And in the fourth year, they stayed on a plateau. This is exactly what happened in England, by the way, nationwide when they introduced their national literacy strategy. Quick gains in the first 2 years or so, and then a plateau that they couldn't get beyond until deeper strategies had taken root. Then there's a school about a mile away, which out of 22 schools in the district is one of the schools with the highest number of special ed kids and second language kids. This school took a different approach. It said, let's not worry about the literacy test. Let's concentrate on improving literacy for all students in an authentic way, in ways that also engage their parents and the community, that involve all teachers in the school, not just the English department, and that focus on all kids, not just those below the passing mark. And they did that with intensity and with commitment. What were the results? In the first year, no measurable improvement. Because if you're focusing on authentic changes in teaching and learning, because of what it takes to change your practice, which is first awareness, then beliefs, then practicing it badly before you practice it well. All because you have to do something badly before you do it well. That is the universal of change. And it takes time for authentic change practices around instruction to take root. So no improvement in the first year. But in the second year, although they were one of the most challenged schools out of the 22, they scored above the district mean. And in the third year, when the first school had hit a plateau, this school was now the second highest performer in the district. It did it paradoxically by concentrating on the learning, and the test scores looked after themselves. Performance matters, but if you focus on performance, you'll not get sustainable performance, because it's like going to sleep. I'm jet lagged. When I go to bed at 11 o'clock tonight, if I go there thinking, I must go to sleep, I must go to sleep, I must go to sleep, the last thing I'll do is go to sleep. But if I do all the things I know I need to do in order to sleep, like stay awake now, so this helps, like walk around, which is why I'm doing this, to get some exercise, like eat properly, eat healthily, not eat a lot of unhealthy, stodgy food, have good relationships around me, so I'll try and phone my wife before she goes to bed, because that sort of makes me feel better and makes her feel better. If I do all those things, then probably I'll go to sleep. So I need to be aware of the performance, but not perseverate on it. And the same is true with many other things. Be aware of it, but don't perseverate or over-focus on it. But do all the things you need to do in order to improve performance. Learning comes before achievement, comes before testing, in that order, not testing and then achievement, and then you get to the learning as the last thing you think of, and usually you don't get to it at all. You just get into easy things that give you your test performance. So this is depth. Remember, I want you to choose which one of these you focus on afterwards. How are we doing for time, by the way? Next is endurance. Endurance is exactly what it sounds like. Will it last over time? Most changes didn't last of the ones we examined over 30 years. They didn't last for many reasons. They didn't last because the kids changed and the teachers couldn't adapt. They didn't last because the teachers got older and they lost energy. They didn't last because waves of reform kept coming into the school and each one contradicted the reforms that had come in previously, and the teachers got cynical and withdrew to their own classes and disinvested in school-wide change. And they didn't last because the principals or the superintendents turned over too quickly, and as they did, a new blinding vision kept coming into the school every 2 or 3 years, following the blinding visions that had gone before, because the visions were all about the leaders and not about the led. This is why they didn't last. One of the greatest threats to sustainable improvement is failed leadership succession. And leadership succession is desperately important. What happens when you've left your job? That is the big question, and who follows you? And the reason it's important was well understood in 1500 and something, 32, by Machiavelli, who said, "It is a common defect in men," forgive his sexism, it was almost 500 years ago. "It is a common defect in men not to consider in good weather the possibility of a tempest." You get your Gates money, you don't think about the time when your Gates money's gone. You start up your pilot project, you don't think about the time when all your best teachers will leave and get promoted and go somewhere else, and the older ones will stay behind and get tired. You get a new leader who's great and you love them, and you pretend, you conspire together to believe that the leader will be there forever, that they will be everlasting leadership like everlasting life, a great temptation to fall into. And then when the leader goes, there's no follow-up plan. There's no idea what to do next, because, as Jim Collins and Bill Porras put it in their book Built to Last, all leaders, no matter how charismatic or visionary, eventually die. You are all going to die. I am an inspirational, motivational speaker, but let me tell you, you're all, the one sure thing in this room that I can predict with certainty is we're all going to die, and we need to prepare for what will follow. And we can do that but we don't, because we don't pay attention to leadership succession. There are 4 issues that we need to pay attention to. And by the way, we need to pay attention to these not when we're about to leave our leadership, but from the moment that we first start it. If you think about it just as you're about to leave, it's too late. You should have thought about it earlier. The younger you are, the more you need to think about it. Don't just wait till you're near the grave and ready to repent everything and prepare for a successor. Think about it from the beginning, not at the last moment. The first is planning. How do you follow one leader with another? Who should follow whom? Do you pick someone? Do you appoint from within, or do you bring in an outsider? Do you want continuity, or do you want discontinuity? These are some of the issues that you think about. You'd think that there's a lot of succession planning, but there isn't. Most planning is a reaction, not a proactive strategy. And boards are the worst of it of all. You have a leader there and then they leave. They get promoted. They move somewhere else. They get sick. Or as in one case, in one of our schools, they have an affair with a member of staff and have to be pulled out of the school very quickly, whereupon they're moved into the district to hide them, and then they rise to the rank of superintendent. Not a career strategy I'm promoting amongst you. And when they go, the system sits back and says, oh, we need a successor. I wonder what kind of principal we want, or what kind of superintendent we want. And as if it's a brand new event, they'll sit round and try and decide upon a job description and criteria, as if this was totally unexpected. It's a bizarre thing to do. You shouldn't wait till somebody's gone before you start to think about what's needed to follow them. All improvement plans should contain succession plans. Shall I say that again? All improvement plans should contain succession plans. This doesn't mean you get to choose who follows you. You get to nominate a particular person. But it means as the improvement needs of your system are developing, so you should have an idea of what are the leadership needs within your system. Do you need a different kind of leader or leadership skill sets in 2 years than you need now? If you've moved into a failing district and it needs a tight hand in the first 2 years, do you need somebody in the next 3 who's got a different skill set that can build trust, inclusion, capacity? And do you have that, or does somebody else have that? But if you know what the skill sets are, you're able to, when a crisis comes, you're ready for it. If you've got a good principal leadership, do you need more teacher leadership, or more student voice, or more parent involvement and leadership over time? So where's your school or your system going? And what are the leadership needs as it's going as well? By the way, this also makes the process transparent rather than secretive and politically manipulative. It doesn't mean that if you set out your leadership needs in your plan that you get your way, but it means you're part of the conversation about what those leadership needs are. So one is planning. Part of that, by the way, is continuity, discontinuity. It is very important. Continuity means the system's going well, the school's going well. We need somebody not who'll repeat it, but will take it to the next level and build on what's already been achieved. Discontinuity means the system's stuck or drifting or failing, and we need somebody to come in who'll give it a whack on the side of the head and send it off in a new direction. And you need to diagnose accurately whether mainly your school or your system needs more continuity than discontinuity, or vice versa. The difficulty is most of us as leaders are attracted within our genes to discontinuity. We know the secret of high-performing leadership, which is, how do you become a good leader? You follow a bad one. Because your mere existence gives you much more approval, because you're just not the hated tyrant or the incompetent drifter that you're replacing. So you love a system that's in a mess. You feed on chaos, disorder, poverty, deprivation, conflict, huddled masses. You want them all brought to you so you can heal them and bring them together. That's what attracts you to leadership, to making a difference. And that's great. Great. In fact, there's some evidence to show that leaders who go around fixing broken systems tend to come from broken homes. In healing the system, you are healing yourselves, which is fine if you're in charge of it and it's not in charge of you. So discontinuity is okay, providing it's not a driving need that you have, so you see discontinuity where there isn't any. And you give people a whack on the side of the head who don't need it. They just need building up, developing, moving on a little bit further. Continuity, discontinuity should be based on accurate diagnosis, not your own driving psychic needs to heal and repair wounds and rifts around you. Are you with me? This brings us succession management. It's easier to, and by the way, if you're wondering how long this is going to take, I spend the longest on the first 3 and almost no time at all on the last 4. So just in case your legs are twitching at the moment, this is roughly the pace of it. Succession management means it's easier to find a good successor if there's many successors to choose from. If there's barely a breathing body in the room, it's hard to find an adequate replacement. So part of the secret of succession planning is developing many leaders within your existing system, so you have many candidates to choose from over time. This will come on to distributed leadership, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But the more you develop leadership across your system, the more you're likely to find good successors. I've just started work on our project with my co-investigator Alma Harris, who's based in the UK, on 4 different sectors. And all I can say very early on is in the business and sports sector, I'm astonished with the amount of responsibility and leadership that is offered to and expected of very young people in their late 20s, early 30s. Who usually have an MBA or something like that behind them, but are then thrown in to stretch tasks and given support alongside them. They are not dragged out on protracted bureaucratic continuums of multiple stages of aspiring leaders, developing leaders, performing leaders, high-performing leaders, which is just another way to control their entry into the profession, which ensures that by the time they make assistant principal, they're twice as old as most of their peers in other sectors who've had more expected of them, more offered to them earlier, and many people will leave because their brothers and sisters and peers are treated more like highly competent, high-performing adults earlier in their careers than they are in the educational bureaucracy in the way we treat them at the moment. I'm speaking from very recent experience and perception, and you've gone very, very, very quiet, I notice, at this moment. But succession management means building those cultures of giving people responsibility early that doesn't have to have a name assigned to it or a dead person's shoe to be left that they then have to occupy. Third, how long should you stay? When should you leave? How do you know? The answer is, for most of you, if you're a principal or you have a high-level system position and you're doing well, you stay for at least 5 years. If you don't, everything you care about will collapse in pieces behind you within months of your departure. And we've seen this over and over again within our study. The time when people are most tempted to leave is in year 4. Because roughly the way it goes is, year 1, we work with the enthusiasts who are drawn to us, because they're enthusiastic about everything. And they're not the group who should steer your changes. They'll follow everything, including a lemming off a cliff. Then you have a second group who are more cautious. They're your better steering group. They're more questioning, a bit more critical, want to wait and see if this will work, if this benefits the kids, this is just a new fancy buzzword, or if it has real substance. And then in years 2 and 3, you build up capacity with them. And then you're stuck with the hardcore resistors who've seen other principals come and go. And they know the school doesn't belong to you, it belongs to them. And you'll probably be going soon as well. So in 4th, they really dig in deep in year 4. And you're trying everything you know, and none of it works. And you go home and you cry a lot because you feel stuck. You can't go any further. But you've had a good first 3 years. You've made a fair bit of impact. So hey, time to move on and take a challenge somewhere else. And you leave too soon before the change is part of the hearts and minds of everyone, and it collapses behind you. And those who've stayed through year 4 tell us that actually in year 4 their leadership efforts were making an impact, but it's like raising adolescents. They're changing, they're just not thanking you for it yet or making it evident. And if you stick through year 4, you'll start to see the results coming of your efforts within year 5. So the minimum, if you're doing well, typically is about 5 years. The maximum has 2 answers. If you're in a community that is very suspicious of teachers and schools as professionals, if it's an isolated rural community in poverty or a difficult urban community where trust is hard to build, the answer is A, either stay as long as you can, or B, promote from within your school or your system so that people in the community already know who's moving into the leadership position, and your trust will stay and it doesn't go back to 0 with a newcomer coming in. So you stay as long as you can and or promote from within. For everybody else, the answer is between 5 and 7 years is your ceiling. At the end of 7, you start thinking, well, I'm getting a bit bored here. I can complete everybody's sentences for them. I'm starting to spend more time out of my school because I'm bored within it. Or, wonder if I should have an affair with that member of staff. And the answer is, don't change your partner, change your job. It's a much better strategy for sustainable improvement. So, succession, duration, and frequency is number 3. And number 4, the hardest is, this is the toughest, is the existential part of succession. The leaving of leadership is a rehearsal for the leaving of life. And none of us like to contemplate that, so leaders and followers alike tend not to talk about it. And you get into the situation I've been in with my mum, who's 87 years old, lives in England in a council flat, a welfare apartment, very nice welfare apartment. They're not bad in the UK. And at 87, and she's kind of Protestant repressed, I'm just being able to get her to talk about the vague possibility that within the next few years, she may just pass on to another life. And as we talk about that, we're starting to try to talk about her funeral. I've been trying to do this for about 12 years. But finally, she's been able to start talking about it. Until then, the only thing she would talk about is that the money for my funeral is under the carpet in the corner of the closet. And that makes her happy to know it's taken care of. And when my mum stayed with us this summer, I said, Mum, look around. It's not your money. I'm very grateful for it, but it's not your money we need. We won't worry that we can't afford it. What we'll worry about is that we won't know what to do when you've gone. We won't know whether you want to be buried or cremated. We won't know whether you want to be buried with my dad. My dad died when she was 42. She never married again. Or whether you want to be buried separate from him. By the way, I found out she wants to be buried separate from him, so perhaps there's a bigger family story to start to unfold there. She didn't actually say she wanted to be buried with somebody else, which is reassuring. We won't know who you want to be at your funeral to celebrate your life. We don't know what hymns you want to be sung. The hardest part of succession, if succession hasn't been taken care of, is the people behind you won't know what to do when you have moved on. Because there's been no plan, no conversation, no discussion. And because of this, the problem is, for these existential reasons, because it's so hard to think about, the time when we're no longer the center of attention, no longer in power, no longer impactful. Because we don't talk about it, we undermine our succession. And we do that in 3 ways, according to Chris Argyris. One is we deny our succession. We imagine we will lead forever, and we coach or mentor no one to follow us. 2 is we sabotage our succession. We make it impossible for the next person to follow us. We blow all the budget, so there'll be no budget for the next person. Or we take all our best people with us to our next job, which ruins it for the people that we've left behind. We actively sabotage our succession because we want the person who follows us to be good, but not quite as good as we have been. And we want them to be loved, but not quite as much as they loved us. So we sabotage our succession. Or third, we try to clone our successor. We choose someone who reminds us of ourselves, a little Austin Powers-like mini-me, who we over-invest in saying to them, one day, all this will be yours. And we prepare them for it, coach and mentor them, and then they move to another part of the country. Or their spouse gets a job elsewhere, and we have no plan B to follow up. And instead of choosing somebody who has our values, but can move the place to the next level, we tend to choose someone who's just like us, rather than with a different kind of skill set. Because leadership's about knowing what you're not good at and admitting it, and building people around you who can do the stuff you can't. I work with big teams around me because my incompetence knows no limit. And therefore they cover for me in the areas that I'm a bit ADHD. The last thing I want in my leadership teams is other people who are all ADHD. Can you imagine what that'd be like? People with their arms flying around, walking around the room all the time, bouncing off each other. I want 1 or 2 people who are calm, quiet. Somebody who can add up a bunch of numbers on the budget and come out with the right conclusion. People who can organize paper, filofaxed into a proper file. People who are good with technology, which I'm not. Know your incompetencies. Try and cover for them to the best degree, but get people around you who complement your own styles and skills. You don't have to be the supreme best at everything. So number 4, how do you deal effectively, existentially with your succession? Because I've just described all the things you already do. And that is, when it's time, like the poet Philip Larkin, what you do is, before you've developed all those other leaders, so there's many people to follow you, many successors who can take over, and then when the time comes, you walk away into the long grass and you watch it from a distance. You walk away, you don't keep going back, you don't keep hovering over their shoulder, you don't keep showing up in your office again. You watch it from a distance, because you've laid all the foundations. And before I go on to the next part, I'm therefore just going to ask you to turn to your partner, and I'm sure you've been asked to do this before, but it's another opportunity. Given everything you've just heard, in the leadership position you are in, talk to your partner for 2 or 3 minutes each. What is the legacy you want to leave behind you? What will be your legacy? And have you even thought about this already? 2 or 3 minutes each, and then I'll take some comments. Just quickly, in a word or a phrase, what were some of the things that you said? In a word or a phrase. Actually, I'm going to go around the table, and would the person geographically opposite me, please, at that moment, and I'm going to move around, so you don't know who that is yet. But the person geographically opposite me at that table, would you just give me the word or the phrase about what your legacy would be, chiefly?
Thanks.
You can say pass, by the way. That's okay, too.
We talked about collaboration and a learning community that works together well.
Okay, so leaving a strong collaborative learning community behind you.
Self-perpetuating learning?
Amongst the people behind you, that you've increased the capacity for self-learning. Yeah, okay, good.
You talked about increasing leadership within your building and self-reflection.
More leadership within your building and self-reflection, yeah?
Some systems in place that have improved the learning and also aided teachers to help kids improve learning.
Systems to improve learning.
I would say systems as well as kind of building capacity from a lateral
Yeah, okay. Systems capacity.
We talked a little bit about that fine line between not being quite done with your work and then staying a little bit too long.
Right, so balance really is an important thing. Yep.
I think Nancy talked about putting children first and leaving structures and systems that put children first.
Right, okay. So a sense of a mission or a purpose. Yeah, and
About relationships and building capacity.
yeah. All these things, I mean, I'm very relieved that none of you said, especially at the system level, the temptation is to want to leave a legacy of a thing. You want to leave a basketball court or the wing of a building named after you or a program that didn't exist before. But all things fade over time. They will not leave a lasting legacy. I am a published author, more than 25 books. And it's great, but there's nothing more humbling for me than getting a letter from my publisher saying, your book is now out of print. And in my field, almost nobody reads anybody more than 7 or 8 years after they have stopped writing. Your shelf life is very, very short. I have no illusions that publishing will make me immortal. What my legacy will be, and yours, in a good or a bad way, are the principles you stand for and the way that you communicate them through big and small acts of behavior. The people who you've worked with and developed and influenced over time, and the practices and skills that you've grown that can never be taken away from the people who've developed them. Purposes, people, practices, these are the core things of your legacy. When I know we've only done 2 out of the 7 principles, but you haven't seen how brilliantly I can integrate Finland and the 300 underperforming schools into the remaining 5. As you go away over the break, just think about these first 2 so far, which is learning before achievement, before testing, and making sure that lasts from one leader to the next. What does that mean for your systemic leadership, which spreads leadership and coordinates your efforts across the system? Focus on learning over time across leaders. What does that mean for your systemic responsibility? Can you focus on that as your conversations, which I believe you always have, as you go to your little dinner break right now, and we'll be back in half an hour? I'm going to take you through these remaining 5 principles very, very quickly. Because the first 2 are the ones I really wanted to dig in with you on in a lot of detail. And then I'm going to use Finland and this network of underperforming schools actually to bring together what I would call the systemic principles that work across your system more and their relationship to the things going on within the schools. So and we'll have a bit of time for question and answer or interaction after the Finnish example and after the underperforming schools network example as well. So that's the rough orientation for this final hour. We've talked about depth, which is learning before achievement, before testing, and having some compelling purpose that brings people into and keeps them in the job. We've talked about endurance, which is sustaining improvement across leaders and not just within the tenure of one particular leader. We've already really hit on breadth by talking about succession management. because what we learn from what's now called distributed leadership is that when we do have those strong collaborative communities that are authentic, first it enables us to focus on our purpose together, so it actually enables you to achieve your purposes more effectively, especially if you're going against the grain a little bit in other areas. It gives you the courage to stick with it. And secondly, when you've got more breadth, remember, it helps you with succession because you've got more leadership and more leadership capacity to feed your leaders up to the next level when the circumstance requires. So this is what breadth is about within your school and within your system. And if you read the book Sustainable Leadership, you'll see that this is actually really just the starting point of the issue of breadth, because there are good and bad ways to distribute leadership. And how you distribute leadership also depends on your circumstance and your setting. Sometimes you'll mainly do it through the structures, time, space, role, responsibilities, committees. More often, once you've done that, you need to do it through the people, how you build trust, develop different kinds of relationships. When and where you guide it, when and where you create the conditions so that the leadership will come forward. Those are the sorts of things you'll see in the book that unpacks it much more. Fourth, we raise right at the beginning, which is justice, and we're going to come back to this soon in the case of the closing two examples. Remember, you are responsible for all the people your actions affect, whether or not they are in your own building and in your own system. So if you have a magnet school, it has to think about its effect on the school that's not a magnet. If you have schools that are doing well, what's their responsibility to the schools that are not doing well, as well as to themselves? If you have a wealthy suburban system, and Jonathan Kotzel has talked about this, what are your duties and responsibilities to districts around you that are not so wealthy and not so privileged? What do your partnerships look like with them? If you have a little bit more, how do you help people who have a little bit less, rather than compete against them to their disadvantage? So these are just some of the things to think about in relation to justice, and I'll come back to this again with the closing two examples. Fifth is diversity. Strong systems, ecosystems, are biodiverse. This is the core meaning of sustainability. Weak ecosystems are highly standardized, have a very limited range of diversity within them. This is true for genetic systems as well as ecosystems. So royal families tend to pass on infirmity and insanity from one generation to the next, sometimes because the gene pool may be just a little bit too small. Brothers and sisters should not marry each other, not only for religious reasons, but also for Darwinian reasons about survival of the species. Genetic eco-diversity creates stronger systems, and the same is true of organizations. If our organizations are overly prescribed, if you have one literacy program that everybody is supposed to teach in the same way, on the same page, at the same time, at the same pace, you have created an inflexible, standardized, vulnerable system that cannot respond and adapt to change as the kinds of literacy we want change, as media literacy and critical literacy come to the fore, as we find that our program meets some students' needs rather than others, because teachers only know one way to teach. So strong systems promote diversity. Many ways, not any ways, but many ways of being excellent. And then network these together. Teachers learning from teachers, schools learning from schools, systems learning from systems, and your job as leaders is to get cohesion amongst these so that they stick around and fit your common purposes, rather than alignment, which is making sure everybody at every level addresses everything in exactly the same way. Alignment is the enemy of diversity and sustainability. cohesion is its supporter. Are you with me? Michael Fullan will have given you a very similar message, but in a slightly different way. So it's your job to promote and support difference around common goals and standards, and cross-pollinate and network those forms of difference together so it strengthens your eco-environment over time. And we'll see an example of that a little later on when I come to Finland and the Underperforming Schools Network. Sixth is resourcefulness, which is about energy. The world is running out of oil. I've just been working in the United Arab Emirates, and within the next 10 years, although it has a boom based on oil now, it will have virtually no oil left. So the United Arab Emirates is thinking hard about what will happen beyond the age of oil. If you go to Dubai, there are 1/6 of the world's cranes in Dubai, building at an incredible pace. But as people will say there, the problem is not building the buildings, it's what you do with the people when you put them in the buildings. The property is the easy part, the people is the hard part. One of the sheikhs, the first sheikhs of the United Arab Emirates, said this about the oil boom. My father rode a camel. I drive a Mercedes. My son will fly an aeroplane, his own aeroplane, and his son will ride a camel. If we treat the oil as if it were a bottomless pit and do not think about what lies beyond it. And the same is true for people. We cannot treat people as bottomless pits of gas. We have to think about how to restrain our use of energy sometimes, but also how to renew people's energy through increasing motivation, inspiring their passion, and one of the key things is increasing their own learning, because learning adds energy. If you're learning tonight, you should come out of here with more energy than you came in, because learning creates and renews energy. For a child who leaves all their troubles behind at home because the school is so inspiring for them and the burden lifts during the day, and just as much for a teacher. When teachers are learning on the job and not just after the job is over at the end of the day, this renews their energy. So energy, resourcefulness, increasing motivation, not treating people like bottomless pits of gas till they burn out is extremely important. And this, remember, is part of the new public management, public engagement, support, lateral capacity, all feeding the achievement of those purposes at the top there. And last but not least is conservation. Conservation is how do we protect and preserve things of value from the past as we progress into the future? How do we connect the future to the past? In policy, people often want to ignore the past or obliterate it or demean it because they want to claim control and responsibility for the future. But we'll see from Finland, and also from the other example I will give, that the best reforms actually connect the past to the future, including those who embody the past, which is teachers who appear to resist change. If you can find ways to value what experienced teachers know and can do and include it, rather than perseverate on what they don't know and can't do and exclude them because of it, we'll have much more chance of bringing about successful change and improvement over time. And again, we'll see examples of this in the closing two examples. So here you've got 7 principles of sustainability. As we say in the book, they're not a menu, they're a meal. They all fit together. You have to eat your greens, even your broccoli, as you engage with all of them over time, including your justice as well as your depth and your breadth and your endurance. Now let's see two examples that bring these together. I'll give you one, then we'll have some discussion, and then I'll give you the other. We'll go first to Finland. And when I take you to Finland, you may have some existing images of what Finland is about. The Finns know how to finish, by the way. In Finland, there are 5 million people and many, many more reindeer. One of the first things you think about Finland is you think about the reindeer, or perhaps one of the most notable owners of the reindeer. This is Father Christmas, Santa Claus, lives up in Lapland in the far north of Finland. They're all Lappish people, by the way. When they come to the ministry, other people wear their suits. They wear their formal traditional dress when they come down to Helsinki. This is not your management team after they've failed AYP. This is a group of Finnish men enjoying their sauna, one of the traditions, the great traditions of Finnish life. Don't circulate this on the internet, please, because people might imagine there are other things that it connotes. But this is the modern image of Finland. This is Nokia. Hands up if you have a Nokia phone. Okay, a couple of you. One of the best-selling phones within the world is Nokia. Nokia epitomizes the forward-looking nature of Finland. Nokia and its suppliers are responsible for 40% of the GDP of Finland. Nokia is closely involved with other leading heads of corporations and the presidents of universities in meeting regularly on a national level committee chaired by the Prime Minister to think about and plan scientific and technological development for the future of Finland. Despite the conceptions we might have of Finland, it is number one in the world in terms of economic competitiveness. Despite people's conceptions, this looks like a bit of a socialist country, it's number one in terms of economic competitiveness. Science, technology, innovation are a paramount priority within Finland. And Nokia itself is a fast-changing company. This is Nokia, but you probably don't know, although the myth is that the name Nokia was invented to sound Japanese and make it look like a more convincing technological product. Actually, this is the town Nokia on the river Nokia, which my colleagues and I visited, named after the large furry rodent called the Nokia. So when you next put your Nokia next to your ear, imagine it's a big furry rodent that's actually sticking there. Nokia began in the 19th century as a lumber company, as a tree company. Then it diversified into rubber trees and rubber products. So in the 1920s, these were the Nokia ads, advertising Nokia galoshes, Wellingtons, flowing down the river Nokia to the public from the Nokia factory. And by the 1950s, 40s and 50s, Nokia were making rubber high-heeled shoes for women. And then from rubber products, it moved into rubber insulation for electrical cables. And then you can probably project where it moved to after that, into communications. It's a company that has continually changed and adapted over time. And after a major downturn in the Finnish economy in the early 1990s, Nokia dramatically restructured to deal with high-tech products like its phones. And for instance, now, if you work for Nokia, you will change your job about every 15 months because your loyalty is not to a department, your loyalty is to Nokia. And if you change your job within Nokia, you develop more learning across the different departments and sectors and increase the possibilities for communication and interaction. Nokia has a very interesting culture. In the turn of the century, there was a big fire at the Phillips electrical plant in Albuquerque in Texas. It does make wafers for mobile phones, tiny, tiny components. One of the only suppliers in the world that makes 3 particular kinds of wafers. Nokia and Ericsson, a Swedish company, both use those wafers. When a fire happened in the plant in Albuquerque, it destroyed many of the wafers. At first, this looked like a small problem, and it was communicated to people down below at Ericsson and at Nokia. Ericsson has a Swedish culture, which is collaborative, so remember, not all distributed leadership's the same, which is we work together, we want to be pleasant to each other, and we don't want a disturbing, uncomfortable atmosphere. So when the bad news about the Albuquerque plant came to the bottom, they didn't want to bother the higher-ups because they thought it wasn't important and they didn't want to upset them. By the time Ericsson found out what the problem was, it was too late, because Nokia has a culture, bad news must spread quickly. Think about this for your system. Bad news must spread quickly. So as soon as negative results or problems come in, it immediately goes up to the top. The top instantly sent out Nokia employees to Albuquerque and to other suppliers to find out the scale of the problem and alternative components. When the scale of the problem became apparent, Nokia bought up all the components. Nokia bloomed in terms of its production and success. Ericsson collapsed and had to merge with Sony, so it is now Sony Ericsson. And all of it was to do A, with a tiny fire in Albuquerque, Texas, and B, 2 different cultures. One is we're collaborative, supportive, nice, don't like to rock the boat. The other, we're collaborative, but bad news must travel fast, and we all have to deal with it together. And in many ways, Nokia epitomizes the culture of Finland and also the Finnish educational system. You've read a tiny bit about it. Let me just explain how this works. One is there is all this influence on maths and science and technology, but the future of Finland as a creative nation is connected profoundly to its past as a creative nation. This is a famous Finnish composer, Johann Sibelius. One of the schools we visited was 2 miles from the home of Sibelius. The Finns see themselves as a highly creative musical people. There are more composers per capita in Finland than in any other country in the world. Therefore, when you go to high schools, you will see not only is there an emphasis on maths and science all the way through high school, but also just as much an emphasis on creating creative and performing arts for all students. You can go to almost any Finnish family and they will entertain you musically to a high level in the evening. All musical instruments are provided to children free by the state, along with school meals, as a fundamental part of their educational provision. So the crucial thing is, it's not just an innovative mission in science and tech that breaks with the past, but it's about creativity for a knowledge economy that connects the creative Finns to their past and is seen as an extension of it. And you can talk to a student or a deputy minister and they'll give you exactly the same narrative about the common vision and the way that Finland is moving through this particular way of looking at the world. So 1 is your mission and purpose. 2, remember, that then enables you to attract and keep highly qualified teachers, because the key place to control quality and standards and performance and accountability in teaching is at the point of entry. if you control quality at the point of entry and bring in the most outstanding people, you do not have to spend disproportionate amounts of your time mopping up for mediocrity and incompetence later on. So the Finns mainly control quality at the point of entry. When you have these outstanding teachers, what then happens is a relationship between central and local. Centrally, the government has a broad, what it calls a steering system, a very broad national curriculum, not prescribed in detail, which leaves high flexibility for teachers at the level of their municipality or district to develop curriculum across their schools together through the system. So when teachers collaborate, they're not just collaborate on delivering the details of what other people have prescribed for them, but they've got substantive issues of curriculum and instruction to collaborate on together. So you have mission that connects the future to the past, high quality teachers, collaboration around particularly curriculum development. In a culture where the three favorite words of teachers and principals of trust, cooperation, and responsibility. And in that, the teachers trust the system and the system trusts the teachers. You don't hear teachers complaining about the government and the system, and you don't hear complaints in the other direction. What the government often says is, we give them the money and they solve the problem together. We give them the money and they solve the problem together. When you ask Finnish teachers why they do so well and the achievement gaps are so small, they say it's not because we create geniuses, but because we lift every child up from the bottom. The moment there is the smallest sign that there is something wrong, they will talk to another teacher about that child. They'll bring the teachers together. They'll put the issue to the welfare committee that contains counsellors, the school nurse, and other personnel, as well as the teacher. Because in the school, teachers see that all the children are their responsibility, not just the children in their class or the children in their subject. And so it's not just trust and cooperation, but it's also this profound sense of moral responsibility that runs through the culture, up, down, and sideways. What about the principal? All principals by law must have been teachers. You cannot be a principal if you have not taught, because you must be connected to the core of the work. And all principals continue to teach for at least 2 hours a week, even in the largest high school, because they want to stay connected to the kids, and because they want to remember what it's like to teach so that they can have stronger empathy with their teachers. And when we say, how can you do all this and be a principal? Their answer is, because we're not swamped with outside initiatives that we have to respond to, like the Anglo-Saxon countries. They can concentrate on teaching, learning, and quality. We talk about capacity building, but Tom Hatch from Teachers College Columbia gives us a very interesting metaphor. Think of capacity like water capacity. Usually to increase water capacity, we can actually do two things. We can increase supply, more water. And this is Michael Fullan's conception of increasing capacity. More training, more resources, more materials, more support. But there's another side of water capacity, which is reduced demand. Water your gardens less often. Put a brick inside the cistern in your toilet. Reduce demand. And if you already have high capacity, especially when you do, the burden on you is not to keep on increasing supply. It's actually to reduce extraneous and unnecessary demand on already high-performing people, but to create the conditions where they can keep on performing and improving at a high level over time. Are you following what I'm saying? Capacity is about reducing demand as well as think about you, your system, your principals, your teachers in this particular sense. So this is the principle. What about the system across the schools? Some very interesting things going on at the system level. We went to the city of Tampere, which is leading edge even in terms of Finland as to how it works across the system. In Tampere, first of all, the group of principals meets regularly. Together, they feel they are responsible for the children of Tampere, not just for the children in their school. They're responsible for the future of Tampere together. So if one principal needs to do something that everyone recognizes as important and doesn't have enough resources, he or she will phone around the other principals, and one of them will say, "We have a little bit extra. Would you like some of ours?" Because collectively, they're responsible for the children of Tampere, not just for their own kids in their own school. And Tampere is also now developing a system so that some principals have a system role as well as a school role. There'll be a district leader across a group of schools or a group of issues, as well as the leader or the principal in their school. And they'll work with the other principals at that level. This is building system capacity as it networks leaders together. And it's also developing more distributed leadership in the schools, because as the principal moves some of their time out, it needs more capacity within the school to run the school when they've stepped out. If when you go on PD during the day, or you go to a meeting, you are regularly phoning back to your school or your system, you have failed at distributed leadership. Because there should be people there who are able to carry on while you have given yourself to your learning. There are exceptions to what I'm saying, but mainly the system, as you spread out into other roles, the system should grow behind you to take over what it is you've been doing. So systemic leadership, involving principals more in system issues, is linked to growing capacity and developing more distributed leadership within the schools themselves. And we saw a lot of that happening in the schools as well as within the system. And last but not least, by the way, I'll say two more things about Finland. No educational testing, none at all. There are teacher tests, but no standardized tests. No testing. Second, Finland starts formal education later than any other developed country at age 7. But before that, it doesn't mean kids aren't learning, because they're in daycare or early childhood education. But there they are not dealing with downloaded formal curricula. They're engaging in the two essential pre-literacy activities in their schools and in their families, which are play and conversation. So what I've described is a feature of the schools and the system, a feature of the culture, and a feature of the society and how they fit together. What I'd like you to do with 5 minutes at your table, which whatever coherent group you're with, is ask the question, what is it about what you've just heard that may apply to you and is workable within your system to help it improve over time? Because the two things about Finland are, one, you can't copy it because it's a system and a society and a culture. You can't just clone Finland in Washington State. But two, you shouldn't ignore it or dismiss it either by saying it's small, northern, dark, or not very diverse. The question with all of them is avoid cloning and going overboard, avoid dismissing it, but have an intelligent relationship with the principles you can take from here and how they might apply to your system. 5 minutes, what can you take from this? How does it apply to you? Thank you. Can I draw you back together, please? Thank you. Good. I'm I'm not going to take some open question and answer this time on this one, because you've had some time to process at your tables now. What I will do is sort of go into the final segment, because I talked about learning from outliers, learning from other high-performing countries and contexts, and learning from leading-edge practices. Let me describe for you another example of something that brings together these different principles of sustainability. So with Finland, you see the emphasis on the long term. You see the importance of conservation, of respecting and embodying the past. You see the common purpose. You see a lot of distributed leadership. And you see a lot around networks and social justice and the strong helping the weak. But one of the problems is if you show people Finland, it's a bit like taking a brand new teacher and showing them a fantastic experienced one and saying, be like that. In a completely different context. And the answer is, well, that's interesting, but I've no idea how to get there. So this project I'm showing you may give you some hints about intermediary steps and processes onto a kind of bigger vision and a stronger direction. And this is a network of 300 underperforming schools that we talk about in the paper that you've read, engaged in trying to improve and lift their results together. These schools, by the way, the project was at first called the Underperforming Schools Project, which didn't really attract a whole lot of volunteers. So a lot's in the name, always. So they renamed it the Raising Achievement Transforming Learning Project. And it had a number of components. The first is there are objective ways to identify publicly, as available on the web, which schools have had a dip in performance over 1 or 2 years. This is by raw results, this is in relation to other schools, and it's also by a measure that's called value added, which is a measure of what difference do you make to the kids that you get. So you may not be able to control the kids who come into your class, but what difference do you make to them within a year? A 100 score means as expected, less than 100 is less than expected, more than 100 is more than expected. One of the answers in America, I think, is not less measurement, but better, more sophisticated, fairer measurement that enables you to identify performance in context in relation to the kinds of kids that you get. You're then invited to join this project, 300 of you. And you go to a conference together, an orientation conference, and there are others to follow up. In this conference, you really learn 3 things. You learn, 1, you're all in it together, and you give each other moral support. That when you're underperforming on your own, you feel hopeless and a failure. When there's 300 of you underperforming together, you realize it's an inherent challenge and difficulty within the whole system. It's not just something about you. Second, you get inspirational input and technical input about how to look at your data in ways that help you help your most needy students. And third, at the conference you meet, there are storefronts from a whole range of mentor schools who have kids like yours but are performing at a higher level. And they talk about the things that they do in their storefronts that enable them to get these kids to a higher level. Nobody tells you you should find a mentor. But you get $18,000 a year to spend on improvement any way you like. And in this network, not only are your results transparent, but your process of participating is also transparent. Everybody else can see what you're doing. So there's enormous pressure and expectation to find mentors who will help you. But nobody says you must have one, and definitely nobody assigns you one. It's a matter of complete choice, but great peer-driven expectation. When you're in this situation now, the mentor schools also get additional resources, because the evidence is when you want the strong to help the weak, If you don't give the strong additional resources, their performance suffers as they help the weak and they're out of their schools. So you have to add resources to protect their performance so that they're motivated to help the weak and bring the weak up to their standard rather than their standard also falling. It's counterintuitive and it takes work politically to sell this, but inequity now for greater equity later on. And so now you have a number of things: common purpose, connection and networking of schools with each other, an emphasis on justice, on the strong helping the weak, and then into this stuff that connects sustainability in terms of endurance to immediate results, which is that a group of highly expert principals throws into this network a menu of items which in their experience have brought about short-term, medium-term and long-term improvement. It's interesting that you cannot control a network. A government or a bureaucracy cannot run a network. It can start one, it can fund one, but you can't control it, because networks are digital and governments are analog. Governments are like old telephone systems with one exchange at the top and then exchanges underneath and then exchanges underneath. If you run a digital system through an analog management strategy, you destroy the thing that the network is supposed to do. You can't control them, but you can disturb them. You can start them, fund them, and then you throw stuff in like little bombs for them to deal with over time. And one of these things is this menu of short, medium, and long-term strategies that you get in conferences, that you can access on the web, and that you can see in operation in different ways in some of the mentor schools. And in the paper you've seen examples of what these are, and I'll just give some very, very quick examples to show you how these play out. None of these short-term strategies give you an immediate lift in performance within days or weeks. None of them are rocket science, but none of these are unethical either. You wouldn't do PhDs on most of these. They include things like you can't get a good maths teacher in your school, buy somebody else's maths teacher on a Friday night or a Saturday morning and bring the kids in then. Get past students to mentor existing ones and pay them a little bit of money to do so. Connect students on the web to each other in other districts so that they can share study strategies. Then you don't have to be a nerd and learn from the kid next to you. You can learn from another kid who's far away from you. Got a problem with 11th grade boys? Bring in motivational speakers to deal with 11th grade boys. And, most importantly, eat more bananas, drink more water. Because however badly you're taught, if you eat more bananas and increase your potassium levels and drink more water and hydrate the brain, you'll learn a lot better. It works for Mick Jagger. I've seen him do it. Keith Richard has a small implementation problem, I think. But it definitely works for Mick. And it works for the kids in school as well. It gives you an immediate lift that does two things. It buys you time by getting the politicos off your back to persevere with the longer term issues, right? So you don't have to be like that school I described that had no improvement in the first year while it was getting improvement in years 2, 3, and 4. You can even buy some time and see some lifts in year 1 by implementing these kinds of strategies, and they're not unethical. Second, it fits the theory of happiness, which is, according to Jonathan Haidt, which is a strange name to write a book on happiness. Jonathan Haidt points out that if in long-term goals, and I'm a hiker, we invest all our happiness in the final destination, and then we divide it by the time it took to reach there, our happiness quotient per minute is very small. and most of us will give up before we get to the long-term goal. But if we have intermediate goals that are connected to the long-term goal, then we're more likely to persevere, because the next horizon, the next rest stop, or when you're hiking in England, the next pub or the next cafe gives you an intermediate goal and a little lift of happiness on the way to the long-term goal, and your overall happiness quotient per minute is much higher and you're more likely to persevere. So these short-term ones give you a lift and keep you going as you're persevering with the more difficult medium and long-term ones. The medium term take about a year or two and include things like professional learning communities using data to drive instruction, training in new instructional strategies, bringing in mentor programs for people in struggling schools, and in one of the key examples that we have, a computer program that enables you to monitor online in real time whether the kids are doing their homework or not. So you can log in and say, are they online, are they not online, and you don't get surprised too late when their work has been hanging about for ages, they've been procrastinating, and you don't find out until too much time has gone by. So these are the sorts of things that help you focus on instruction, but take a year or two to bring about over time. The long-term things take about 3 to 5 years before you see the benefits in terms of instruction. And these include really changing the leadership structure of the school, giving students a lot more voice in their own learning and in leadership in the school. In Boston Public Schools, students are involved in negotiating the teacher's contract, in selecting principals for some of the new small high schools. They're involved at the very highest levels as well as in the details of their own learning. But this takes some schools some time to develop. Building trust doesn't take a few weeks. It takes a long time to invest in and develop before people believe you. And really focusing on transforming, not just making existing teaching more effective, but really changing the way that teachers teach so it's more profoundly transformational over time. These things take about 3 to 5 years. So this is the short, the medium, and the long. And the project's working hard to connect the three. Its one difficulty is that the short-term stuff works so well that teachers get kind of addicted to it. Eat more bananas, drink more water, results go up, fantastic. Bring in a maths teacher on a Saturday morning, fantastic. Because they see immediate lifts and they don't challenge the way they teach, teachers tend to like to stick with the short term and not go in, so it's harder work actually to drag them. You need to put more energy into the medium and the long as well as the short, because all the inertia in the system is towards the short and not the long, and that's what we're working with them on right now with a big group of their schools. So even here as an intermediate step, you see something that's focused on results, that deals with endurance by developing steps on the way to it, that has a common purpose, that distributes leadership, that has the strong helping the weak, that networks diverse expertise together, and that renews people's energy and motivation. And in the most dramatic case of a school where the first-year students in high school were performing badly, and the principal went to the most experienced and cynical teachers in the school and said, I'd like you to take these kids and remember everything you used to do in the 70s and the 80s before the curriculum got prescribed to switch these kids on. I'd like you to draw on that, abandon the existing curriculum, pay no attention to the tests, and do anything you can to get these kids reconnected to their learning. And this was one of the most turned around schools in the project because it valued the existing knowledge of the most experienced teachers and renewed their energy and the kids' energy by connecting the two together, the principle of conservation. So what I've tried to do in the brief time that we've had is really think about 3 ways. How can we learn from the outliers about principles of sustainability versus unsustainability? How can we learn from the most high-performing countries about the directions in which we might want to be headed? How can we learn from leading-edge practice about getting into new public management, which is still having the goals, still valuing performance, but getting stronger support, more public engagement, and increased lateral capacity that replaces the fear factor with the peer factor. That's what I've tried to do with you in this short time that we've had this evening. I know we only have a few minutes left and you have a few words to say. I will stay behind if anybody has things they want to discuss with me. I don't believe there's time now, is there? Or there may be.
Yeah. Why don't we take 2 or 3 questions and then...
Okay, let's take 2 or 3 questions. Do you want a minute to generate one with your partner next to you before you put them in, or are you just ready to go straight away? You don't care. Take a minute with the person next to you. It'll just get your brain moving again, and then I'll take a bunch of questions and try and respond to them all at once. Okay?
If you had to give us one piece of advice, if you had one enduring understanding that you would say you would like us to take away from this session, I know what I would say, but what would you say that would be?
It'd actually be 2 pieces of advice, and one is what to do now and what to do tomorrow. So one is what to do immediately, and second is how to prepare. Immediately put the learning before the achievement, before the testing. And you'll still get it right, and you'll still reap your results, and put in a few of those short-term strategies, and they'll buy you some time. Meanwhile, this country will follow all the other Anglo-Saxon countries, which does not mean going back to the 1970s and what I call the Julie Andrews curriculum. These are a few of my favorite things. We're never going back, and we never should, but it means we'll keep focused on the outcomes, which we should, but we'll have much more motivating ways and inclusive ways to achieve them. And I'll put any size of bet on that within 5 years or less, that's the clear way we will all be moving. So prepare for that and get your staff ready for that, and build the leadership capacity to deal with that. That's what I would advise. Other questions or comments? Shock and awe? Or in that order? Okay, let's close then. Thank you.